Hello, we're going to be talking about Guillotina's CRUD API interface. To get started, we'll assume that you're going to have a Guillotina install and configuration ready. We will initialize a Docker container for PostgreSQL to get us started, and I have a configuration file here to connect to the PostgreSQL. The database is configured to be accessed at /db, so all these databases map to URLs at the root of the site, and everything else is just default configuration that's bootstrapped for you when you use the cookie cutter for generating a config file. So with that, we'll just serve the app. Our PostgreSQL server is running. So when you first start off, you can just access the root of the API. Make sure you're authenticating. We're using root for username and password. So make sure with all these requests that you're authenticating them. By default, Guillotina secures every single resource and requires authentication for every resource. So at the root of the site, you'll get a response that displays what databases you have configured to run for this API, and those databases map to URLs. So we have the DB, our database is configured on /db. Databases are, for the most part, just holders for what we call container objects. So before you can actually start managing content with the API, we'll create a container to house that content. That container is stored in the database. So the URL we're still using is with /db, but we're posting to it with a payload of @type container with the ID container. The ID corresponds to what you'll see in the result URL. So if we post this, we get this response. It kind of just tells us, hey, successful 200. This is some information about it. But now we can access that container at /db/container. This gives you some basic metadata on it, like the type, name. UID is the unique UID of the object that's stored in the database. Each piece of content in your API will have a unique ID that's assigned to it, that's unique across the entire application. And there's creation and modification date. The base container doesn't have a lot. It's the other content that you'll post that will have more data and that you can work with more. So next we'll create just a basic item content type, and we'll give it the title Guillotina is fun. And again, we'll say the ID is G minus is minus fun. That is going to correspond to the URL that's built for you. So we got a 201 response created, some more information about the content. So it gives you the full canonical URL of the object, the short name, type, and again the UID. So if we want to get the item now, we should do a get on that item. We get a lot more data about the item. We get information on the parent object as well. We have information on the behavior data that is assigned to it, and the title, of course, that we had set. And we can also create a folder. a folder is content that can contain other items. So if we can do nested structures. So we can do a post on our folder. Say, let's give it ID of 1. So you see the URL is /1. So if we do /1, see how we're building the URL structure here. We can keep doing this and we can give it different names. Foobar, we can just keep going. So as you can see, we're building content, a tree of content. It starts with the root of the API and then goes with your configured database, and then you create containers inside of that database that house all this content that you're building URL structures of content. So the database, or the API structure in this sense, is dynamic, and you're building it as you're creating the content. And all the content that you have in your database is mapping to the URLs that you're using to interact with it. So let's demonstrate how to update existing content. In this case, we can update a few things. We'll update the title, updated. We'll also set some properties in the core behavior. Behaviors are a way of adding dynamic schemas to your content. By default, Guillotina provides core to all to the two types that it ships with. Guillotina only ships with two types, item and folder. So everything else is going to be add-ons that you provide additional types with. But those two by default have core. But there are some other behaviors that you can add on, as you'll see, like an attachment. There's a multi-attachment behavior, and there's a dynamic field behavior. But in this case, we're just going to go through the basics here of editing behavior. And so it's just kind of nesting the JSON object structure here to say this is the behavior and these are the properties I want to set inside of it. So once we patch it, we got a 204 response. Now if we get on that URL, we should be able to see, hey, title is updated, the tags are updated, description updated. So one interesting thing about core is the title is an alias in core for the main title on the object. So if we look back at that patch data, we patched it here, but it's also displayed in core. And that's because it's on the content, it's defined as a field, but also core title is a basic field of core, so core just defines it as an alias as the field on the content. To delete, it's just simple delete. Remember, you're building the URL structure here, so if we want to delete the item that we created, we get a 200 OK. So now if we try to get it again, it should be a 404, and it is. But you can also add blob file data to your content. We have simple file upload and download support, but we also have TUS upload support, where you can do chunk uploading. So you can do large files upload in chunks. So before we do that, we need to say, hey, we want to add this attachment behavior to our content. And that is just patching the behaviors, saying, hey, I want to add this behavior here. We patch, get a successful response. If we look now, at the behaviors, it's right here. You can see that the behavior is set on here. So this is an attribute that cannot be removed or modified directly. So, and then if we want to upload a file, we can provide additional headers about information about that file and the content type of that file. And we're using the @upload/file, saying this is the field name. So if we go back to our response, we can see that iAttachment was added to the response, but the file and where it stores that file data is in the file field, but it's null by default because we haven't uploaded anything yet. So if we go back to our upload request, we can see that the URL structure here is our content that we created. And then we append @upload/file corresponding to that field name file. So this is the syntax here in the URL structure is designating sort of like sub-routes on your URL structure that you're dynamically building here. So all content will have basic URLs without like this. So like you add, update, or get, patch, post, and delete, and all the basic verbs are going to be accessible at the content URLs like this. And then additional actions you want to do on that content are going to use this @ notation in the URLs to denote like this is a different type of API endpoint that you can perform on this content. So if we go to what's the body of this, we'll just add a file or an image here, and we'll patch it. And then we got a 200 response. So now if we go, we can see that, okay, we have some metadata on that. Well, you can also, instead of uploading, you can download. And that's the response right there. So as you can see, we've added an item type and a folder type. There's an addable types that you can endpoint that you can call to find out what are all the possible types that you have available to you in any part of your content tree. So you can even, so we did this at the container level. You can do it here, like here as well. And like I said, we only have item and folder, but when you're creating your own content types, you can define what kind of subtypes are allowed in particular folders. And so like this could be restricted if you wanted, and this could be a way of like querying what kind of content you want to be able to dynamically add in your content tree. Additionally, there's the @types endpoint, and this will give you a JSON schema representation of all the types and behaviors in the API. This is useful for JavaScript developers and consumers of your API to validate and to know what is available to them. And that concludes this topic. The next one will be configuring Guillotina.